Praise Jesus Christ, God the Almighty King. We have a very hard time not focusing on ourselves, and it makes sense, right? Because how can you take care of yourself if you're not focusing on yourself, if you're not concerned with your current situation, your individual circumstances? It doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. It's all about you and your life, your wealth, your health, the things that benefit you. It's all about you, and nothing else matters. Isn't that true? Well, that's not true. It isn't true, because the people who have it the worst in life, the worst way to live life is when you are constantly focused on yourself. And if your life is miserable, then that's a good place to start. And that place is asking yourself the question, do I focus on myself too much? And it seems kind of contradictory, right? Because how can you do well and be well if you're not focused on the self? Well, there's weird thing that seems to be like a very powerful tool. Let me rephrase that. There's this thing about life that God put into place where, for some reason, if you focus on the very thing, it doesn't seem to work out well. And it's interesting. It's an interesting thing to think about, because it might get confused in relation to certain things. Like, for example, if you're focused on getting a needle or a thread through the eye of a needle, you have to be very focused, right? Because your hand's shaking and your needle is in the other hand, and you have to be very precise, extremely precise. You have to focus very much on the end of that thread to make sure there's no fibers that are going awry, because otherwise they'll catch on the eye, right? So how does what I said earlier pertain to that? Well, let's have another example. So if you're focused on making money, let's just say, just focus on that, then you seem to always not get the fulfillment when you do get it. Not to say that you won't get it. Sometimes you don't get it because things aren't aligned properly with that. But even when you do get it, it's still not good enough, and it's because of our focus. And so, going back to the original point here, which is, are you miserable? It's because you're focused on yourself. If things aren't working out, you're focused on yourself, but you have to be focused on. So how do you do that? Well, here's the thing. First and foremost, just to make it real easy, we have to focus on the Lord all the time. And it's so hard sometimes, because especially in times right now where there's inflation rising, there's nuclear war threats, there's countries being invaded, there's inflation, if I didn't mention that yet. There's all this crap going on, right? And so, I lost my train of thought on that, but just going back, it's like you focus too much on the self, and it's difficult not to, especially since we live in such a self-centered time. I mean, we are living in a time where self-centered people are everywhere now. We're all guilty of that to a certain extent. Some of us more so than others. But the focus on the self, the focus on the superficial thing, is the problem. So we have to focus on the Lord. We have to focus on God. And it's like this. So, going back to the thread and the eye of the needle. Well, what's your focus? What are you focusing on? Well, you're focusing on getting the thread through the eye of the needle. But you have to ask yourself this question: what is the intention of getting the thread through the needle? To eventually sew something. Why do you want to sew that thing? To so on and so forth and so on and so forth. So eventually there's a core value there that goes beyond just putting the thread through the needle. There's a core value. There's something of more importance than just making money. You make money to A, buy things, B, invest in things, C, provide from your family in no particular order, just listing them off. So it's not just about making money, because if somebody put a pile of money in front of you, that's just not enough. You have to then take that and do something with it. And if you're working to make money, then you're going to be better off if your motivation is much greater than just making money for the sake of making money, because, oh, I like the feeling of having it. Oh, it empowers me. But there's got to be more to it. So you get guys who are like business coaches and so on, and they you'll hear it often. They say your why has to matter. You have to have a why. Why are you starting your business? And you can have your little superficial whys. People who don't have a strong enough why core, they just make up a why. But the people who survive or who are extremely successful, they have a much deeper sense of, their why is much deeper. And and so we focus too much on ourselves. If you're somebody who's miserable, if you're not light, then you're miserable. And so we have to put God as our why. And it doesn't matter what goes on. And this, I'm taking this a little further, because I was thinking when we think too much about our individual circumstances, because we all have it. Everybody has their individual circumstance. This person has this issue. This person has this success. This person here. This person there. Everybody's got their thing they're going through. And I think what makes us so frustrated is that we think we all need to be at the same level as people who parade themselves around social media, or they're on the news, and there's always so much glorification and so much praise for high status people, and everybody thinks that they need to be at that level in order to maintain some kind of level of happiness. And it's really unfortunate, because the media is so powerful. We grew up on television and radio, and now social media. If you were born in 2005 and you're 17 now, your entire life has always known social media. There's always been some kind of device that you grew up with that enables you to be constantly plugged into the information field. And it's very, very disturbing to think about. When younger generations would grow up and spend more time in the wilderness and play in the dirt and be way more in touch with God's raw, life-giving creations. I mean, there's no doubt that the internet and our devices are an extremely powerful and very helpful device. But the thing is, when you grow up not knowing any other world, it becomes oppressive, because you need to seek beyond these man-made devices that we have. And so the thing is, we focus so much on our circumstance, our individual circumstance, yet we're all going through different levels of it. And it's good for us as an individual to understand and be okay with the fact that, hey, you're just at this level, you're at this place, and you have to deal with this issue, and God's going to get you through it no matter where you are. We don't all have to be at the same place in our maturity level, in our success level, in our financial level, our relational levels. We don't have to be all at the same spot. And but more importantly is to be okay with that. And with God, it makes things okay. And last point I want to make is, if you're focusing too much on your individual circumstance, well, and you might think to yourself, oh, God doesn't bless me in this aspect of my life, or if you're an atheist and you're just thinking to yourself, oh, why don't I have it as good as other, or why am I suffering this particular thing right now? But see, it's too self-centered, it's too focused, you're too selfish. One of the things that I love that Grant Cardone said, who's a real estate guy, and a lot of people don't like him at all, but I really like the guy. He's a grassroots self-made man. And he said, and this might sound superficial, but think about it. He said this. He said, if you're not rich, then you're selfish. And of course, it's like, oh, well, we all don't need to be running out and becoming rich, and that's fine, and I agree with that. But I think it pertains more to people who have chosen for themselves to go down the journey of creating wealth. And so if you decided to choose that for your life, to be more affluent financially, especially financially, then and you're having a hard time with it, then Grant Cardone comes along and says, look, the reason why you're not making these gains is because you're selfish. And it's a fantastic perspective, because once somebody who's going down that journey gets a little bit of wealth, they hoard it. Or imagine somebody who's been broke their whole life and they suddenly get a big chunk of change, either by an inheritance or by winning the lottery, but definitely no work of their own, or maybe a lucky gamble, And so what happens is they clam up and they hold the money close because they're fear of losing it, and they're they call it loss aversion, right? Well, so, but because of that selfish, self-centered mindset, you restrict yourself from gaining more. And so, of course, in order to gain more finances, to make more money, you have to help more people and provide a product. And the more transactions you make, the more money comes in. So you want to help more people and provide more and more. And so you have to let go of your cash. You have to reinvest it, and you have to not be so not have such a tight grip on your finances. And so it's a great saying, because people who are fearful and they're not making those big moves is because they're selfish. It's all about them. They don't think about other people. And so one thing that helps me out personally quite a bit is thinking about what God provides on a daily basis for everybody in the whole world, for the universe. It's infinitely abundant. And if I get too focused on my individual circumstance, I know that I'm not focusing on the Lord. And people are going through different circumstances all over the world. There's billionaires going through their billionaire circumstances, and trillionaires going through their trillionaire circumstances, and broke people going through their broke people circumstances, and homeless people going through their homeless people circumstances. And everybody has these circumstances they have to deal with. But the thing is, you don't have to relate to it or identify with it. It's just a current circumstance. Now, the thing is, we're designed in a way to repeat things, and we're also designed in a way that we find comfort in things that are familiar. So if you're somebody who's been broke 30 years of your life, well, that's a familiar territory. You're not necessarily going to start venturing out and becoming wealthy because it's unfamiliar territory. You have to actually you have to journey in unfamiliar territories within the mind, within your thinking and perspective. So these things have to change. And if you're somebody who's not comfortable with venturing out and going into the unknown, well, you're going to stay exactly the same way, and so is your circumstance. And you can't curse God for that, because it's also a safety thing, because we can't live life in constant chaos. We have to have things that repeat, so that we can have things that are familiar, so we can be safe. Now, we get too identified with our circumstances. If we're sick, then we're constantly sick. If we're broke, we're constantly broken. If we're rich, we're constantly rich. It's circumstantial, and it's things that repeat over time, and it keeps us exactly the same. But we can venture out. And one thing, if you're a person who's working on yourself and wanting to venture out and venturing out to better yourselves and increase and experience new things in a positive way, then you're going to have to let go of certain things. And in order to be okay with circumstances that aren't necessarily favorable at the moment, or you might feel a sense of lack or why things aren't working out, don't identify with it. You have to always focus on the Lord. And one thing the Lord does for us every day is provide so much. So for example, you can sit and look at the world and say, look how much oxygen God has provided today. Look at the gravity, it's still working. The sun's going to rise, it's going to set. The birds will sing, and all these things are provided by God the Almighty King, who pulls from an infinite resource that he creates. So imagine that. There's nothing greater than God. There's a song that Hillsong, or I don't know if it's Hillsong, but the beginning lyrics are, God of creation, you spoke into the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. And I'm sorry, I'm missing the crucial part there. He says this. He says, from no point of reference, you spoke into the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. So I can't remember if it's life or light, but same thing. And the beauty part behind that lyric is he says, from no point of reference, you spoke into the dark. See, we need